Hi, 10th grade. Mr. K here. Wow, we are remote again. What a world we live in, huh? So I am going to do my best to translate our lesson for the day into a virtual version. Watch this video, follow along with the instructions, and we will see what there is to see. So our goal for today, you guys read chapter 17 and 18 before last class, and I want to take a look at those two. I want to focus a little bit on chapter 17. 17 is Holden's date with Sally. 18, I think, is a little bit of a mixed bag. There's kind of a lot of little things in there, so I'm going to leave that one a little more up to you. But I want to take a look at 17, that date, and see what we can come up with in terms of important moments, reflections on Holden's character and characterization, the way he's growing and changing, and the author's themes and purpose. I'm going to give you guys the free write that I gave to my other class, just in case you are in the mood for some free writing. A haiku, which many of you probably know, is a poem that's 3 lines long. It goes like this: a 5-syllable line, a 7-syllable line, and another 5-syllable line. For example, and I wrote this one while I was very hungry: rich smoke, wind dancing, barbecue baby back ribs, sweet fire, heavenly. That's my hungry haiku for the day. So if you enjoy our little free writes, take a minute and write me a haiku. If you feel like skipping today, I guess that's okay. But it's good to stretch those brain muscles. So feel free to pause the video and do that if you want to. I'm going to move on to our next section, though. I want to start us off with chapter 17. Now, again, one of the skills I want you guys to be working on is annotating and analyzing on your own. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do some of this work, and then I'll talk you through sort of what my version of this work looks like. So for chapter 17, I want you to select 2 or more interesting quotations from this section. It could be anything, but I want you to highlight a couple interesting quotes and explain why you chose them or what they reveal. So again, if we're trying to eventually be able to talk about Catcher intelligently, either through an essay or a graded discussion or something, you're going to need to be able to identify interesting moments that reveal something to us about Holden, his character, author's purpose, etc. As a sort of guide, I would say you don't have to answer all these questions, but hopefully the questions you choose might approach some of these questions. One question we might want to answer is, what kind of a person is Sally? Holden invites her out on a date, tells us a lot about her. So I would say, what does Holden think? How does he describe Sally? But also, what are we, the reader, supposed to think? We know Holden isn't always the most reliable narrator. So is there a difference between what Holden sees and what we see? And what does that difference reveal about him, his perspective, et cetera, et cetera? What are the most interesting things Holden says to Sally, and why are they interesting? He says a lot of things. The date doesn't necessarily go the greatest, but I think looking at what are some of the things he says, there's some big stuff in here that's interesting. And vice versa, what are the most interesting things Sally says to Holden? Because we only ever get Holden's perspective, looking at what people say to him and the way they say it to him can reveal to us stuff about him that maybe he doesn't pick up on or realize. We talked about that when he was in the club with the Lavender Girls, how he keeps calling them dumb and morons and blah, blah, blah. Really, if you look at the way they're treating him, they're just uncomfortable and want him to leave them alone. But he doesn't see that. So we have to look at their reactions to him in order to get that. So what are the most interesting things she says to him? And then I think a big thing is, how does this date help characterize Holden? What does it reveal? And a big question I want to start thinking about is he changed from the beginning of the book? How and why? As we get to the end of this book, I want us to start to figure out, what is Salinger's point with writing this book? We have this kid, he's going through a lot, we're getting to know him really well, but I want to start to look at what is changing about Holden, if anything, and what does that then reveal to us about what Salinger's trying to communicate? Why is he telling us Holden's story? What is he hoping we'll take away from it? And I think that's a question we need to start thinking about constantly, but with this chapter, I think it really makes sense. So what I'm going to ask you to do, pause the video, go back to chapter 17, play around with this, and then let's see what you picked up on, how it compares to some of the stuff I picked up on, and we'll move forward from there. All right, if you are back, I'm going to hop into my copy of Catcher in the Rye, and I have to move, so excuse any weird noises. So here is my teacher copy of Catcher in the Rye. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this section with Sally. One thing I kind of forgot to highlight, actually, that I think is really interesting is in this first section, he talks about there were a million girls sitting and standing around waiting for their dates to show up. Girls with their legs crossed, girls with their legs not crossed, girls with terrific legs, girls with lousy legs, girls that look like swell girls, girls that look like they'd be bitches if you knew them. It was really nice sightseeing, if you know what I mean. So he's sort of like objectifying girls here. You know, just he's all about the way they look, staring at their legs, blah, blah, blah. But then we see a little bit of a transition, so I'm going to switch my colors. In a way, it was sort of depressing, too, because you kept wondering what the hell would happen to all of them when they got out of school and college. I mean, you figured most of them would probably marry dopey guys, and then he goes off on that. I thought this was kind of interesting because he starts off sort of trying to objectify these girls and just caring about them for their looks. But then he starts to transition into this whole part about worrying about what's going to happen to them, worrying about their future, worrying about the kind of guys that they might end up with and the way that those people will treat them. So I think this is sort of interesting because I think this objectification part is almost like a little bit phony, to use one of Holden's words. You know, Holden admires guys who get the girl. He admires guys like Stradlater, and I think that he's trying to be one of those guys. And for me, I really think that might be part of the reason why he invites Sally on this date in the first place. We'll get into that, but he's sort of trying to be this guy who is a ladies' man, and blah, 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 but ends up transitioning to this, really thinking about who they are as people and their future and feeling bad for them if things don't end up right for them. So I thought that was kind of an interesting and maybe revealing moment there, too. And I don't think that's, this attempt at being, the Stradlater type hotshot guy, I don't think this is going to be the last time this becomes relevant in this section, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Finally, old Sally started coming up the stairs. And I started down to meet her. She looked terrific. She really did. She had on this black coat and sort of black beret. The funny part is I felt like marrying her the minute I saw her. I'm crazy. I didn't even like her much, and yet all of a sudden I felt like I was in love with her and I wanted to marry her. I swear to God, I'm crazy. I admit it. I think the question here is, if he's telling us he doesn't even like her that much, why did he invite her out on this date in the first place? And why, Lord, why, does he say he feels like marrying her, he feels like he's in love with her? Kind of an interesting moment here. And again, I think it might harken back to this, like, what does Holden want to be? What does he want for himself? And what's the reality of his situation? So he, I think, at least now when he's telling us this story a year later, knows that he didn't really like Sally or have feelings for Sally. I don't know, maybe he even knows that in the moment here. I think that's up to interpretation. Does he really buy into this idea that, he's going to fall in love with this person and marry her and blah, blah, blah? Or even in this moment, is he just kind of lying to himself, trying to be this person who he's not? Again, we have this sort of continuing that sort of objectification or attempt at objectification. Am I late? No, I told her she wasn't. I didn't give a damn that she was late. All that crap they have in cartoons, blah, blah, blah. If a girl looks swell when she meets you, who gives a damn if she's late? Nobody. So again, sort of like, hey, as long as she's a beautiful lady, she could do whatever she wants. Or just like playing this like macho man sort of role. And I think that continues here, and I think this is a little bit of an uncomfortable part here. We horsed around a little bit in the cab, so, fooled around, hooked up, whatever the kids are saying these days, on the way over to the theater. At first, she didn't want to, because she had her lipstick on and all, but I was being seductive as hell, and she didn't have any alternative. I find this part a little awkward and uncomfortable, to say the least, because it's sort of Holden being pushy sexually. He says she didn't really want to, but I kept pushing and she didn't have any alternative. Kind of uncomfortable. And it actually reminds me of the part with Stradlater that we talked about, where Holden talks about how Stradlater kept snowing a girl. She was in the back of the car saying, no, let's stop. And Stradlater just wouldn't give up. Again, something that, as we talked about that, I said I didn't think was really appropriate or okay. And similarly here, Holden's being pushy. He's not stopping his sexual advances when Sally wants him to. And I think that again, it maybe relates to this idea of the objectification here, of asking Sally on the date in the first place. He's trying to be this person who is good with girls, this person who is seductive, this person who is cool, this person who, blah, 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 blah. And that's not really true to who he is. And even maybe to immediately kind of counter this Stradlater-esque, inappropriate behavior, we get to when we were coming out of the big clinch. I told her I loved her and all. It was a lie, of course, but the thing is, I meant it when I said it. I'm crazy. I swear to God I am. So again, he immediately switches to, saying he's in love with this person, that he wants to be with this person forever and ever, which he says is a lie. It's not true. And again, I don't know if he believes it in the moment or he really wants to believe it in the moment. But I think that's just more who Holden is. That he's so curious and confused about romance and about sex and about connection. He's trying to make it happen based on these models like Stradlater, who he emulates. But he's the kind of person who wants a real connection with somebody, and to me, it's sort of sad he's trying to make this happen. And then Sally's response is, I don't know, kind of funny, I guess. "Oh, darling, I love you too." Then, right in the same damn breath, she said, "Promise you'll let your hair grow. Crew cuts are getting corny, and your hair's so lovely." Just, I don't know. How do you respond to that? Going on, they go see this show, and Sally runs into some guy, George something. Holden goes off about he's a phony. Phony. He was the kind of phony that have to give themselves room when they answer somebody's question. He and Sally started talking about a lot of people they knew. It was the phoniest conversation you ever heard in his life. And I think that idea of phonies is getting more and more emphasized in this section. We know Holden hates phonies, and he's mentioned that a few times, but I think he really drills it in this section over and over and over again, which to me maybe represents a change, that Holden is becoming more and more obsessed with this concept of phonies and phoniness. Maybe something to pay attention to. We'll get to that in a little bit. So as we go on, he starts talking with Sally, and I think this is where he starts to maybe be a little more honest. He kind of lets the cool guy veneer fall away and has these conversations, and I think that these get really interesting. He asks her, "Did you ever get fed up?" I said. Did you ever get scared that everything was going to go lousy unless you did something? Do you like school and all that stuff? It's a terrific bore. Do you hate it? I know it's a terrific bore, but do you hate it is what I mean. Well, I don't exactly hate it. You always have to, and he cuts her off. Well, I hate it. Boy, do I hate it. But it isn't just that. It's everything. I hate living in New York and all. Taxi cabs and Madison Avenue buses where the drivers and all always yelling at you to get out the rear door, and being introduced to phony guys that call the lunts angels, and going up and down in elevators when you just want to go outside, and guys fitting your pants all the time at Brooks, and people always... "Don't shout, please," old Sally said, which was very funny because I wasn't even shouting. So a few things. I think that this is a really revealing moment of who Holden is as a person. He's really struggling. Other people, maybe you don't like school. Hey, who wants to go to school? Blah, blah. You don't like doing chores. You don't like, blah, blah, blah. There are lots of things we don't like, but Holden says, it's not that I don't like it. I hate it. I hate all of it. I think this really is revealing about his mental health, and it's impossible for him to be happy. He's so frustrated with the world. He's so fed up. He's so unhappy with the way things are. And I think that that's really poignant and really sad. And maybe one of our questions is why? Again, why? If part of what we're trying to get out of this is, what is Salinger trying to communicate to us? He gives us this character with this really terrible outlook on life and the world around him. And he gives all these specific examples that I think he's not lying about, but they're not the whole story. So maybe part of the question we should ask is why is Holden struggling so much with this stuff? What can we learn from his character and the things he struggles with? What can we learn about ourselves and the way that we should see life, or about society and why society is so hard for this young man to accept? Big questions. He then goes on, I think, continuing to try and find this connection. "You're probably the only reason I'm in New York right now, or anywhere. If you weren't around, I'd probably be someplace the hell off, in the woods or some goddamn place. You're the only reason I'm around, practically." Trying to forge that connection, trying to make Sally feel important, trying to, I don't know, have something genuine come out of this date that he really, I think, called sort of out of desperation. and continuing this sort of mental health thing. Sally says, lots of boys get more out of school than that. And he says, I don't get hardly anything out of anything. I'm in bad shape. I'm in lousy shape. Then he invites Sally to run away with him. Look, here's my idea. How would you like to get the hell out of here? We'll stay in these cabin camps and stuff till the dough runs out. Then when the dough runs out, I could get a job somewhere. We could live somewhere with a brook and all. And later on, we could get married. I could chop all our own wood in the wintertime and all. Honest to God, we could have a terrific time. What do you say? What do you say? Will you do it with me, please? I think this is interesting because, again, it's so unrealistic. And Holden, I think, is departing more and more from sort of logical, analytical Holden and into irrational Holden, doing anything he can to try and forge connections, to try and get away from a world that he's uncomfortable with. And one of my other students in my other class brought up, and I thought it was really interesting, this is almost like a movie-esque scenario. You know, it's this sort of like romantic, we'll run away together, live happily ever after in a cabin in the woods. It's this very like sort of cinematic, dramatic, unrealistic movie-type scenario. Which I think is interesting. It's interesting because we brought that up with Maurice when Maurice punches Holden, and Holden says, I imagine there was a bullet in my guts, and Jane was going to show up and hold a cigarette for me to smoke while I sewed myself up. You know, this very like dramatic movie type reality. And I think that sort of pops up again. So we have Holden sort of drifting away more and more from the real world and inventing these sort of crazy Hollywood versions of life that he might live, which I think is especially interesting when you consider he says he hates the movies. He mentions that to us more than once. So I don't know exactly what we should make of that. But another thing I noticed, too, in terms of like what's interesting that Sally says to him, stop screaming at me, please. She says up here, don't shout, please, which was very funny because I wasn't even shouting. And then down here, stop screaming at me, please, which was crap because I wasn't even screaming at her. I think, again, this is one of those moments where Holden doesn't realize what's really happening. He's getting so caught up and so loud but he doesn't even recognize that that's what's happening. More evidence that he's sort of, I think, losing touch with reality, with the way he's perceived, with what's acceptable and not acceptable. So some of the questions that I sort of came up with from doing these annotations and coming up with like some of the ways that I feel like he's changed. There's a departure from logic and towards a sort of a more movie fantasy. He's trying to convince himself and other people that these fantastic versions of reality are possible. Even more exaggerated obsession with and hatred of phonies we see sort of coming up. Calling himself crazy and over. I swear I'm crazy. I mean it. I'm crazy. Sort of saying certain things and backtracking. This was a note from my other class, but in that first section he talks about how the girls with the nice legs are sort of depressing. They might end up with these guys who are terrible bores. And then he sort of backtracks and says, but I don't know, maybe those guys aren't boring after all. You know, you can never really tell until you get to know someone. So sort of talking and then contradicting himself, going back and forth. And then all of this sort of objectification, telling Sally he loves her, but it's a lie, but he really means it, asking her to run away with him. Being kind of pushy physically and then telling her he loves her. Kind of all over the place there. And I think the big question that we want to come with is why? Why has this happened? Why are these the changes that we're seeing in him? What are the forces that Salinger is exploring? What are we supposed to take away from knowing Holden at the beginning and figuring him out as a person and then slowly seeing him change in this way over the course of this piece? What is he doing or not doing that's leading to that change? What's happening around him that's leading to that change? What's happening inside him that's leading to that change? What's happened in his past that's leading to that change? Or what is he afraid of that's leading to that change? Those are the big questions that I think we should be trying to answer and that we'll get something out of when we finish this book. Then it ends. He tells her she was a pain in the ass and she hits the ceiling. So the date does not end well in any way, shape, or form. Holden's attempt to make this thing happen doesn't work out. And he starts kind of laughing at the end again. Maybe a little bit of a crazy person. Maybe trying to make something funny that's not really funny. I don't know exactly, but... So that's some of the stuff I got out of this chapter. I want to shift to 18, so I'm going to hop back over to my document. 18, I'm going to leave very much in your hands. I think there are a lot of interesting things, but no central sort of, I think for 17, it's really obvious we should focus on the date with Sally. For 16, it was really obvious to me we should focus on the museum. For this one, I think there are a lot of little things. So, what I want to do is let you pause the video again and read back through, pick one or more interesting moments. So having looked at the Sally section, knowing this next section is coming up, building off of that, having some of those questions of like, how is Holden changing? Why? What's interesting? Pick a couple things to focus on and think about, why are you choosing these? Why are these things jumping out to you? What do they reveal? How do they build upon the things we just talked about, the things we've been talking about throughout the novel? So pause the video, go do that. And I'm gonna keep this part short, but I'll talk you through some of my things. Okay, you're back. So just a couple things. I'm not going to go through and sort of mark these up as much, but I wanted to point out some stuff that I'm interested in. And if these aren't things you noticed, maybe you should spend a little time thinking about them before you move on to reading the next section. At the beginning, right after leaving Sally, he decides maybe he'll give Jane a buzz. He has the whole evening free. I thought I'd give her a buzz, and if she was home yet, take her dancing. And then... So he considers giving her a call right after the section with Sally. He's done this a number of times, so I think it's interesting that this comes right after that. He talks about a guy that Jane dated for a little while back, all muscles and no brains. Anyway, that's who Jane dated. I couldn't understand it, and he kind of talks about that and guys in general. I think that might be interesting to pay attention to, too. How does he describe other guys, especially guys who've dated Jane? How does he feel about them? And I think maybe how does he compare to them? I don't know. We've talked a lot about Holden is insecure. Holden can be jealous. So maybe looking at like his concept of other people and what's cool, what a hot shot is. We talked about that with Stradlater. How he compares, either how he thinks he compares, how we think he compares, how much of what he thinks is accurate, where is it coming from? All kind of interesting questions to think about. The next thing I highlighted is he decides to call a guy named Carl Luce. We're going to meet Carl Luce in the upcoming chapters. So just a quick note, he was about 3 years older than me. I didn't like him too much. So again, I didn't like him too much. But he was one of these very intellectual guys. He had the highest IQ of any boy at Wooten. He calls up Carl Luce to meet for a drink, and Carl Luce agrees. So we're going to meet him coming up. I think he was pretty surprised to hear from me. I once called him a fat-assed phony. So again, I guess the question kind of pairing with Sally, why does he call up this person who he tells us he doesn't really like and he's kind of been mean to in the past? Why does he reach out to this guy? We know, I think with Sally, it was attempting this kind of romantic sexual contact connection. With Luce, I don't know why he's calling this guy up. We should think about that. If he had an underlying motive for Sally, what's his underlying motive for Carl Luce? This section interested me too. He talks about this Christmas show and talks about how old Jesus probably would have puked if he could see the show. We talked a little bit about religion in the past. He talks about the Bible and who he likes in the Bible and doesn't like and why. So this other section about Jesus and what Jesus doesn't like and what Jesus does like, I wonder if this is kind of interesting or revealing as well. So you might check that out as too. And then him hating on, this movie he goes to see. All I can see is, don't see it if you don't want to puke all over yourself. Another thing I find really interesting that I don't 100% know what to make of is this section where he talks to us about war and reveals to us that his brother, DB, was in the Army. He landed on D-Day. And he talks to us a little bit about that. I remember DB used to come home on furlough, and all he did was lie in his bed practically. He talks a little bit about Allie and his baseball mitt, and I don't know. I found this section really interesting, and I wondered, we know that whenever the author makes a decision, it's important. It's not like he just was like, and I'm gonna say his brother landed on D-Day. Okay, move on. This is included for a reason. Why is it maybe important that Holden's sharing with us that his brother was in the Army, that he landed on D-Day? I don't know. It's kind of strange, but I think about like, how does this revelation, how does this information change or affect our interpretation of Holden or his worldview or the book as a whole? I don't know. Think about it. I think that's a really interesting question. Maybe we'll bring that up when we see each other next and see what you guys came up with. And then we get to the end, blah, blah, blah. The other thing I wanted to point out to you that we talked about in my other class and I think is important is he says here, I swear if there's another war, they better just take me out and stick me in front of a firing squad. I wouldn't object. And then at the end here, he says, if there's ever another war, I'm going to sit right the hell on top of the atomic bomb. I'll volunteer for it. I swear to God, I will. Holden, I think, is starting to say more uncomfortably often that, oh, I felt like jumping off a cliff. I felt like jumping off a window. Stick me in front of a firing squad. Blow me up with an atomic bomb. This sort of like passive suicidal thoughts where he's not saying like, I'm going to kill myself, but he's saying like, I wouldn't mind if I was dead. So I think, again, if we're tracking like how he's changing over the course of this piece, it seems to me like he's really going downhill and is headed towards a really dangerous place. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that he keeps mentioning, these sort of passively suicidal moments. Maybe something we should be paying attention to and thinking about as we move forward. I think it's really cool that J.D. Salinger, he doesn't just have Holden say, I'm thinking about killing myself. He does a much more artful job of showing us what it's like when somebody's mental health declines. That Holden doesn't go from being fine to, all of a sudden being suicidal. What he does is slowly over the course of this book, these thoughts start to creep in more and more and more. And it's not overt, it's sort of subtle and under the surface a little bit. Really an artful job by J.D. Salinger, I think. So that's my little pitch for why you should love J.D. Salinger's writing style. Anyway, all right, so that's what I kind of have for you for today. Take a look at those passages, think a little bit about them. Your homework for tomorrow next class, is to read chapters 19 and 20, please and thank you. It's a little bit of a longer reading, so give yourself some time to work on it so you don't feel rushed or not get through it all. Chapters 19 and 20, Holden's going to talk with Carl Luce in this section, which I think is going to be interesting, so pay attention to that. And we'll deal with those as we get to them. We're getting pretty close to the end of the book, which is exciting. I think it ends on chapter 26, unless I'm crazy. So we will see the end of this book soon and start to move on. Thank you guys for listening. I hope that you are doing okay on this remote Tuesday. Tuesday? Yes, Tuesday.